It's Friday here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got a special guest on today. Dave Dameshek joins the show. You know Dave Dameshek. He's from Pittsburgh, but you've seen him on national television for years. I want to get his thoughts on several things Steelers, including what's it gonna take for the new leadership to rise and become the future of the Steelers on this roster. All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's our guest, Dave Dameshek. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only do they help you when you're injured in an accident, they also help you with workers' compensation. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. As I said before, joined by the man himself, Dave Dameshek. He returns to the Post-Gazette podcasting platform. We've had him here before. Dave, it's always great to see you, friend. It's that slow time of the NFL offseason when not a lot of things are happening, but the Steelers might have had the most buzz heading into it with the Aaron Rodgers officially signing, and now everyone and their mama got an opinion about how good or bad the Steelers are going to be.
First of all, Chris Carter, what a pleasure. It's not a downtime in life because the nuptials are about to go down on the banks of the Three Rivers, right?
Yes, sir.
Good for you. So you've timed it out, a pro's pro. You scheduled it in the slow point. I'm glad Aaron Rodgers, for your sake, made the announcement before. What if you had to do that? That would be an interesting spot if it happened on wedding weekend. Now he did get married, right? We're not I know he doesn't like us talking about him or his life.
We're not allowed to talk about Aaron Rodgers' personal life. First rule of Aaron Rodgers Fight Club is don't talk about Aaron Rodgers Fight Club. But he was wearing his ring. He said he got married. So people looked it up, said they didn't find it. That's not my expertise. I'll stick to talking about the man as a football player. He said he's married. Good for him. He got a ring. I'll take it at that right now. I do like the idea that he's very much like Daniel Day-Lewis, who decided he chose from the universe of careers. He chose to be an actor on the silver screen. But then anytime he has ever had to do press to promote one of his movies, he balks. I don't like doing that stuff. Like, hey, that's part of the gig, man. Right. And if you make a documentary about yourself in the last 24 months, I don't think you can then say, like, I'm a very private person and I don't like answering your questions. But either way, what it did do, the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers combined to do a great favor to pro football, right? I mean, I don't know exactly what would have been the talking point were it not for this QB quest that the Steelers went on. What would it really be right now? I think it would be the same one that we were having a year ago, which is, are Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and I guess Joe Burrow ever going to vanquish the beast named Patrick Mahomes? And we're still in that spot right now. It's been the same spot for about 6 years. Joe Burrow did it one time, and that's been it. But to your point on Aaron Rodgers, the two times we asked about his documentary, he was like, "Oh, a lot of people have watched my documentary." I'm like, "Well, yes, that's what we do as journalists. We check out the other things." But anyway, I wanted to get to you beyond Rodgers, and this will spill over into the next segment a little bit too. But everyone's looking at Rodgers, and I keep telling it's not Rodgers that needs to be paid the closest attention to tell how good the Steelers are this year. It's going to be the offensive line. It's going to be the young players that are emerging. Particularly, I think the 2023 class is going to play a big role. Not only do you get Broderick Jones, but you get Keeanu Benton on the defensive line. You get Joey Porter in the secondary. Cory Trice as well, when you think about it. Darnell Washington has a better role-playing tight end behind Pat Fry, with Nick Herbig coming off the bench to give you better help there. There's a lot that class, and then also second-year guys like Faltanu and Frazier are going to play a pivotal role in this season, but not just as players on the field. I think as leaders in this locker room, because two things happened this week that were just a reminder of the players the Steelers got rid of. One was Deontay Johnson, who appeared on some podcast and said, and openly admitted he did not go into the Ravens game when he was called upon last year because it was quote unquote too cold. He said he was waiting around by the heater all game trying to stay warm, and he said when they eventually called him in, he thought it was too cold, that his routes wouldn't look as crisp, and that would be bad tape to put out there. So he just refused to go in the game. So while he admits that in bizarre fashion, the same week George Pickens refuses to honor a commitment to a youth football camp that he promised to do in Pittsburgh now that he's not with the Steelers anymore. And I think Pat Freiermuth took on those duties, but those are two guys the Steelers have jettisoned of late, from that wide receiver position. And you look at that and it says, well, maybe that's part of the sign of why they got rid of him, was they wanted the locker room guys. And now I look at the guys that are on their team that don't appear to be malcontents, that don't appear to be, setting any bad examples or lacking any effort. Guys like Zach Frazier, guys like Joey Porter Jr., guys like Broderick Jones, Broderick Jones may make mistakes, but you see him committing to trying to get better all the time. He dropped 20 pounds in weight before this offseason. What say you about the potential of this team actually forming a new, younger nucleus of leadership with the players that they've been assembling in the early stages of Omar Khan's tenure?
Well, first of all, we talked about it about a year ago on this show, or maybe it was my show. Either way, Joey Porter sort of serving as the X factor of that defense. If we assume that they are sound at all three levels because of, all pro pedigree, we know who those guys are. But if Joey Porter can provide something close to sort of lockdown on the other team's number one, that changes what the defense is able to do. So I agree with you about the class, and specifically even more so, the X factor for all of 2025 in my book with the Steelers is Brojo. If Broderick Jones develops to anywhere close to his pedigree, to where he was drafted, I don't know if win total or how to assess it, but I can't imagine how the Steelers wouldn't be a double-digit success in 2025. And that, to your point, isn't owed necessarily to Aaron Rodgers that offensive line at some point, and maybe I've gotten a little over my skis in the last couple of years, but the one thing that Omar Khan did, along with, I think, sort of saying behind the scenes and otherwise, that he felt like mentality needed to sort of shift. He needed some bad dudes, some football lovers and all of that. And, maybe Deontay Johnson specifically is who he was sort of talking about or around, but one way or the other, I know that was his intent, was to sort of change the mental makeup a little bit of the cats in the locker room. But beyond that, Andy Weidel is there to help address the line of scrimmage, the not so secret key to why the Eagles have been real good for a decade now is that they just continually load up on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And now the Steelers have done that. And I, like I say, a year ago, I thought it was going to be a position of strength, as in a top 5, top 6 unit in the league. And maybe they were a little bit young collectively to get there. I think this year, it's got to turn a corner at some point, or at some point it becomes just a bust. They drafted the wrong dudes. But given where 4 of those 5 guys are in their human timeline, it's about time for them to start entering close to what would be considered their prime. And if they do, I like the run game. I like Caleb Johnson a lot. I think that, my Uncle Mike said this, and he's absolutely right. There's some things that you look for when you're watching a college running back. And when you hear a guy get mentioned 1 week or for a month as being in the running for the Heisman, when he goes up against a real good juggernaut defense, in Ohio State or otherwise, as Caleb did last year, he keeps putting the yards up. It doesn't matter who the foe is. He keeps on grinding those yards out. That speaks to or suggests that we have reason to be optimistic that no matter who's up against the Steelers with that offensive line, they have a chance to make some hay on the ground. And then if you can do that, then it's not diminishing Aaron Rodgers or anybody else. You're in a real good spot as the quarterback. If you can establish the ground game and you have an extra beat to hold on to the ball, that is, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Chris Carter, but the 35 or 40 best human beings who play quarterback will all borderline thrive if you keep them clean for an extra half a beat. All those guys, the difference between a lot of those guys is the quality of the offensive line in front of them. If you buy them an extra half a beat, an extra beat, they're going to be able to get off. And then now it just comes down to where's DK Metcalf and Calvin Austin and Pat Freiermuth and otherwise. And then that gets me back to my frustration about not holding on to George Pickens in a contract year when you probably were going to get the best version of him. But it goes back to where we started here with leadership or energy sucks. And I suppose that's what George Pickens was. And that explains why he's no longer in the locker room.
I want to talk about how to further cultivate that, because that, I think, is so important as far as what the Steelers are doing right now or trying to do right now. We'll talk about that in the next segment here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Dave Dameshek. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also help with workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better, who decides when your treatment's over, and who decides when your benefits are over. The answer might surprise you. It's always the insurance company's doctors. They won't have your back. You know who does have your back? Edgar Snyder Associates. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Again, that's Edgar Snyder Associates at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Dave Dameshek. Dave, you're a Steelers story. You know tons of history. You follow the team very closely for a very long time. And so I'm
old. I get it.
See, whenever I give that question to Cam Hayward, he does the same thing. And I'm like, Cam, I'm your age. Calm down. Whenever we're looking at things, I often try to bring historical perspective because I also followed the Steelers for quite some time. But I try to compare things to previous things. Whenever someone asks me, like, "Oh, would the Steelers as an organization do this?" I'm like, "Well, historically they did this." The last time the Steelers, I felt like, developed a championship nucleus of leadership was the early 2000s going into the mid 2000s, and things that we saw cultivate that became part of the culture that made it work then. And I just remember clips of guys like Casey Hampton getting on a young Lamar Woodley being like, "Nah, man, you just want to be good. You don't want to be great." Every time Lamar Woodley would make a play, he'd be like, "Oh, you need to do more." Mike Tomlin would do the same thing. And eventually you see Lamar Woodley making the game closing sack and on Kurt Warner in the Super Bowl. And I learn about these stories where like Ike Taylor talks about how like James Ferrier would have people over his house every Monday Night Football. And all the defense would all watch football together and spend time together. And it makes me wonder what can happen with this Steelers team to help kind of cultivate that type of camaraderie, that type of connection among the team, or if that's something that can be recreated. I asked Broderick Jones about the closeness of the 2023 class. He says them as a group, they do go out together. They do hang out together. And is that something that you look for that you think is essential to rebuilding, or is it just simple? It's simple as, hey man, we just need you to be a good football team. You don't have to be buddy with each other.
It's really interesting, and there can't be 100%. Anecdote. The anecdotes cannot be that every successful team was bonded together beyond the lines and all of that kind of thing. But I think specific to a team like the Steelers in the early part of this millennium, they get Roethlisberger, not four, of course. He's a rookie and therefore not going to be the leader in the locker room. But that defense carried the day. And, you mentioned Ike Taylor, and he'll tell you the story of the night before Super Bowl 43. They stayed up all night. The entire defense stayed out. And what were they doing? They came back into the hotel. If memory serves, they come back into the hotel, or they run into Dick LeBeau in the morning. And he said, "What are you guys all doing up? Like, we didn't go to bed at all." Dickie LeBeau. And not out on a twister, not out doing anything bad, up just talking about what each other meant to what they meant to each other and how they wanted to win for each other and all the rest of it. The Steelers have been in this, I call it, makes me snarky, I guess, but this sort of old mercenary QB game now for the last couple of years. And that can include Trubisky if you want to, and to Russ and to Aaron Rodgers. That's fluid. Obviously, that guy's not going to present as a leader. I do think it's also very funny that nationally and locally, it's been determined that Aaron Rodgers doesn't need the lead. He doesn't. Everybody keeps saying that. I saw Louis Riddick a week ago say Aaron Rodgers, the reason he's in Pittsburgh is because he can just come there. He can just go there and just play quarterback. He doesn't have to lead. I think probably the quarterback and the quarterback lead probably could do some leading. I think there's something to be gained from that. But I take the larger point there about that the Steelers should be well positioned in terms of leadership. I really do wonder, though, where you come down. I'll throw it back at you, Carter.
Okay.
Who has been, Cam Hayward is presented as the leader in the locker room.
He's Mr. Steeler.
Right. And I think he sort of has taken that mantle from Hines Ward. If that's the connection, I don't know if there's a bridge between those two guys, but Hines was sort of, to me, he was the leader of a generation in a way, and Roethlisberger on the other side of that equation. And then Cam Hayward kind of took that mantle. It's funny because I asked Cam who is the leader in the locker room, if not him, 3 years ago. He said Cam Sutton. I don't think that still is probably the case. So it is interesting who fills that vacuum when in the quarterback league, you're not naturally going to turn to the quarterback and look to him to do that, whether it's because they've had young guys in there or guys who are transitional guys, and it's understood that that's what they're there to do. But I do like that Cam Hayward seems to be trying to groom somebody to be his successor, not just as somebody on the defensive front, but to also take those reins and be the leader for the next generation. Who is it, from what you see as a guy who's in the locker room every day, who is the most likely successor to Cam Hayward?
I think Minkah Fitzpatrick has a chance to be that if he returns to his all-pro level status. Minkah Fitzpatrick is a high-level football thinker. He processes so much. There's so many things that he does little that is so good that people don't notice because it doesn't show up on his stats sheet that keeps the Steelers defense in line. Something I brought up in my live.
Can I interrupt and say, to get back to what you asked me 4 minutes ago, I think that's the answer. More and more and more. In 1975 or whatever, maybe rah, come on, there is no tomorrow, backs against the wall, all that kind of stuff. maybe that was some secret sauce you could sprinkle in 5 minutes before a game. I really don't think outside of movies that exists much. We saw Russell Wilson in, like 20 seconds after the regular season loss in Baltimore, go up to Cam Hayward. And that felt flat. He's like, hey, got to just win 4 in a row now. Let's go, Cam. Let's go win 4 in a row. And you could see on Cam's face, I think, the personification of all pro football players and most fans at this point. Like, cut that crap out, man. That doesn't work anymore. I think what it has to do with is the guy, and I think it's why coaches loved Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, aside from the winning, of course, is because they were an extra coach on the field. They knew exactly what every single cat was supposed to do on every single snap. And I think if Minkah Fitzpatrick can do that, the X's and O's and cross the T's and dot the I's, that's more valuable in 2025 than the guy who can say, like, no one believes in us outside this locker room. Although we still have never seen a championship without that being said after the game is won. No one believed in us. Somebody believed in you. You were in the Super Bowl, man. I think some people bet on you probably even to win. I think they believed in you to that extent. I don't think all the people who wore your jersey to the game and spent the money to get there and the whole afternoon cheering and everything was a masochist expecting you to lose and got a good surprise. I think some people expect you to win. But anyhow, yes, I think attention to detail is what wins the day and can lead. I mean, I think that's what Tom Brady basically did. I think Tom Brady was a master of holding to account all of his teammates. Do you know exactly what you're supposed to do on every single play? And other cats who are a little more gunslinger are probably a little looser in that regard.
I think the Steelers, they want the mix of that, right? Because that's one thing that you saw 2 years ago, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick being like, guys need to take practice seriously. And everyone's like, wonder who could they be talking about? We eventually found out that was definitely George Pickens who they were talking about whenever they said those things. But I think that's the thing, is they want to find great leaders. You need great followers. For example, Alex Highsmith never did anything out of step, worked his way up through the depth chart, became a starter, has been the most vocal leader, but now he can say some things because he's been around and they trust him and he's a really good player. And so that's what I think the Steelers are looking to develop. A lot more Alex Highsmiths on the team that are guys that do their role, play their role well, do a good job, and contribute to the culture, and understand that the winning is bigger than them. The winning is not just about it's about everybody working together, being on the same page, and believing in each other, and sticking to a game plan. And sometimes it takes criticism, sometimes it takes positive encouragement, but finding that right balance is a huge part of it. And I think that's definitely something that the Steelers leaders of the future need to learn as they try to build this new nucleus.
Well, I don't want to genuflect here, and I'm not trying to insult Cam Hayward at the same time. To me, I thought that, and I do have to pat myself on the back since no one else wants to. I told you about what was going to happen with Russell Wilson. I told everybody in March, and it went exactly as I told everybody it would go, including that it would end up costing them Justin Fields. And so it did. I was the 1A most troubling aspect. And it wasn't Russell Wilson's fault that he played like Russell Wilson. It was the faith that Mike Tomlin had in Russell Wilson, despite the evidence provided in December. Like, well, you see what's happening, right, Coach? Like, you're going to still roll with this. You're not going to try and change anything. The 1A was obviously, as anybody who was paying attention, was the defense fell on its face. That was at least as big a problem, was the performance of the defense. Literally, guys pointing at each other in games in week 16, week 17, pointing on the field like, no, that was you're supposed to do that. That was your fault there. And it really did make me think, boy, I think the leadership is much more of an issue with these Steelers than I realized it was, because that was a real bad look for a ripe defense. We can talk about, trying to figure out the quarterback and the offensive line and everything else, but the defense was supposed to be the unit that was leaned upon, right? And that's what really cost them as much as anything else did down the stretch in the regular season and in the one and done in the postseason. Agree or disagree?
I think that there's a few different things that play into that. I think a big part of where the Steelers have been as far as leadership wise and why things didn't work out last season, I think part of it was the Steelers were hoping the offensive line would mature last year, and it was too beat up, too mature. Troy Fautanu didn't play. James Daniels was their best player last year. He didn't play. Broderick Jones was playing injured the whole year. Zach Frazier got injured late in the year. And so when that happened, Russell Wilson was not the quarterback that was going to lift you out of that kind of poverty. And so certainly that became the issue. But I think where Aaron Rodgers, when people talk about they don't need him to lead, is they don't need him to be the guy that dictates your entire organization the way he did for the Jets.
Sure, I get it. I'm just having some fun. But yeah, I know.
I get where you're coming from. But my thing is this: I do think the Steelers are in a position where Rodgers can be that sort of mentee that's like, hey, guys, if you want to learn from me, this is what I do. This is how you prepare. This is how we get ready to win each week. And then what you get is this year, if, like you said, Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, Troy, if that offensive line matures and they figure out, hey, this is our rhythm, no one's going to bust this up, this is what we do, then all of a sudden that group's a lot better. And if you get a couple other guys to work out like Benton and Porter, on the defensive side of the ball, then all of a sudden there's a new nucleus rising there. And then when you're building like that, that's the stuff that can make a more complete roster. And if you're shoring these things up, those are the things that can make you a really good football team, homegrown, done on your own, without having to make these big splashes that everyone looks at for big trades and big signings, because you've been doing it right in your own space.
Yeah, listen, with between Harmon and Benton, and I have not given up on Leal. I know that it might be a numbers game and he may not hang on, but that would be a shame, because the injuries in my book are what have felled him, and the uncertainty. I remember talking to you, what is that now, 2 years ago, where they have to make a call on him because he felt like a tweener, and that's exactly what it was. And do they want him to put a couple dozen pounds in his ass, or do they want him to thin out a little bit so they can put him on the edge? And I don't know that they ever figured that out, but I'd like to see something happen with that guy. I guess this is his one last shot to do it. Anyway, not to go down. What's that?
This is his last shot. It's last.
This is it. Yeah, he either pans out or he doesn't. But yeah, I'm with you about that. The defense, it feels to me like that the defensive front, that they pointed at that this offseason and said, we got to get that right. We've been the frog in the boiling water now for 6 years. And it was sort of easy from the moment Roethlisberger hurts his elbow to sort of make excuses for them. But I thought last year was going to be better than it was. But then again, I thought the year before that was going to be better than it was. And both of those times, it was predicated on me assuming that the offensive line was going to develop a little more quickly. If they don't get it right this year, they're in a weird spot, because we understand that the excuse will be, well, we were in transition anyway. We were trying to bridge the gap into 2026 to get to the draft and find the solution there. The good news is I just don't see a path to the Steelers. I know a lot of people say this is the year. The other side of my optimism with the offensive line and the Steelers in general is the cynicism out there that every year predicts, and this includes bookmakers, by the way. Every year it's 8.5 is the Steelers win total. What more do you need to see? You could put Dave Dameshek in at quarterback and that team would win 9 games with Mike Tomlin. He is the greatest floor raiser of the millennium. The question is the high end potential with his philosophy. But it's going to be, do you think Cam Hayward is a part of that transition? I assume he is a part of the transition from this Aaron Rodgers and the string of mercenaries Indianapolis Colts style into the start of a new generation, which will be marked by a rookie quarterback, right?
Listen, I think that Mike Tomlin deserves I think Cam Hayward deserves credit for what he's done and kind of bear the torch, but he's looking for someone to pass the torch down too. He's been that guy for some time. I think that he certainly will be part of that process, but he's been waiting for someone to kind of receive the torch for a while. So it'll be a question of, can some of these young guys take it right now? We got to we got to throw to a break because we're way over our time. We got to switch topics, but I want to get your thoughts on some what if verse here, because that's one of your specialties, and I got a special one about the quarterback position that kind of switches things up. We'll do that in the next segment here on the North Shore Drive podcast. That's next here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind? Step into something more than just a workout, and welcome to the new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training, it's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or you're leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds the confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn today about the exclusive 3-month introductory package only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're also brought to you by Boss Menswear. Boss Menswear has reached icon status for its tailoring, but offers more than just the perfect suit. The collections that they provide also feature casual and athleisure pieces, presenting a complete wardrobe for fast-paced modern lifestyles. Tailoring and sportswear are brought together in a look that is ready for whatever the day may hold. Be sure to check out Boss today. They just opened a shop up in Ross Park Mall. Go check them out today for their selection of menswear pieces. That's at Boss in Ross Park Mall. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Dave Dameshek. I do apologize, Dave, for cutting you off. Me and you can go on forever about different topics.
Well, people should listen to the pre and post show that we do. We do an hour and a half on either end. All I was going to say is what you're kind of getting at without saying it is that maybe TJ Watt isn't the successor to that. And I think TJ Watt has been, but the problem is that now TJ's on the tail end of his career as well. Like TJ might only be TJ for another
3-4 years. And so they need a guy who
optimistic even. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
But see, and that's the thing. Like on the high end, he'll be TJ Watt, that's best defensive player in the NFL for 3-4 more seasons. And if he does that, he'll carry it for a little bit, but eventually they got to find that young guy who's going to go. Like Cam Hayward has held this torch for a while now. Like even during the Ben Roethlisberger years, Cam Hayward was a Mr. Steeler that everyone get behind me. I think 2015 was kind of when he had his comeuppance. So I look at that and I think, man, there's a lot that he can that he can do there. But to your point, I do think that TJ Watt has kind of been that, and Minkah Fitzpatrick's been that. But the big thing is they need this to develop on the offensive side of the ball, because when Pouncey, DeCastro, Ben, Bell, and Brown all left within like a couple years of each other, that's they have not found that nucleus yet. And so that poses to this question, Dave, because if you all aren't familiar with Dave Dameshek's work, he's worked for many outlets over the years. You've seen his stuff. If you ever looked up the What If L, some of my favorite stuff that he explores as far as things that have happened, that could have happened, that did happen, and how it could have changed the course of history. And so just as a fun experiment, because right now we're talking about the NFL draft. It's coming to Pittsburgh next year. They're definitely picking a quarterback. What if the issue of replacing Ben Roethlisberger came up a couple years before it did? Instead of him coming back after 2019, after that elbow injury, he just says, you know what? That's it. That's all I had left. And in 2020, they head into the quarterback market. Now, that would have been an interesting year to go after a quarterback if it was 2020. But let's say the Steelers, they even knew that when he went down, that was it. He was done. He was toast. Because remember, when they traded away, they traded away their 2020 first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick, but in the idea that they were going to get Ben Roethlisberger back and that he could be a really good defensive piece for them. Do they trade away that first-round pick if they know Ben's done and they need to get a quarterback in this upcoming draft that has Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, and Jalen Hurts, all of which were the first 5 picks that went from first overall all the way down to the 21st pick of the second round?
It is a super interesting question that too many people, when they try to play the what if game, apply some 2020 hindsight. Now, if you want to give yourself that, it's kind of like working with a safety net to be able to say, well, and a lot of people, to be fair, did say in the moment, I think it was a decent sized minority in Pittsburgh, but still some people question the wisdom of trading for Minkah Fitzpatrick or giving up that first round pick. I think in hindsight, listen, like Jerry Orbach at the end of Dirty Dancing says to Swayze, when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. If you can get high pedigree, big talent, you get it, and you pay the first round price to get it in Minkah Fitzpatrick. If I do apply some 2020 hindsight, yeah, it would have been better for Duck Hodges to not play like Duck Hodges, and for Mike Tomlin to not raise the floor the way he did that year, and for them to really bottomed out that year, because then the guy who probably gets to them is Justin Herbert. If they fall into that 6-7 range, which is where Justin Herbert goes, right? It goes Burrow 1, and then Tua doesn't go. He goes 3 or 4. Anyway, then the other guy you mentioned is Jalen Hurts, who even if they don't, if they go 8-8,
right,
they still would have a shot at Jalen Hurts. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I did the NFL for Le Batard, and you can find it online if you want to. I did the redraft of 2020, and who would get, if you had the information that we have now back in 2020, the guy who the Detroit Lions would have taken, I think 2nd overall, I think 3rd overall, would have been Jalen Hurts. And you think about what if they still build the team in the same way they would have, you would basically take that Lombardi out of Philadelphia and move it up to Detroit, because that team is built to grind you up just like Philadelphia is now. But Jalen Hurts in Pittsburgh would have been, that sounds like a natural now to us, but that's because of leaning into the offensive line. I think Herbert would have been a possibility. I wonder, given the sort of the spirit of Pittsburgh, and that it comes up every time the Steelers are looking to take a quarterback, or anyone in the AFC North is, that it's always remarked that, like, does this kid have a strong enough arm to cut through those winds up in the Rust Belt come December and January. I think it's one of the more overstated things that people say about it. But I wonder, Justin Herbert now does not sound like a fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers, does he? Knowing what you knew about him coming out of Oregon, and even now, it'd be weird if Justin Herbert were a Pittsburgh Steeler, but I think that's the most realistic result. If the Steelers don't trade Mika Fitzpatrick, they probably move up into the top half dozen, and that's the guy that falls in their lap.
Yeah, I think that would be part of it, right? Is that Justin Herbert would be in the picture there. Also, Jordan Love, he went late in the first round, so he could be in the picture there for that season. But if they don't trade for Mika Fitzpatrick, Mika Fitzpatrick came in and became first team All-Pro. Like, he was a big reason why the team got to 8 wins in the first place. So without him, I could see them being in that top 10 conversation and getting one of those quarterbacks. But even if they trade for him, and they still do exactly as they did that year. The potential if they had gotten Jalen Hurts because they knew that Ben Roethlisberger was gone, what would this team be right now with a Jalen Hurts? They probably wouldn't be a Super Bowl champion like the Lions might be, but I think they'd be a lot better off than they were. Or let's say they even kind of go the path they did. They skip quarterback that year, and then instead of 2022 being the year that they swing it, they go for 2021. Well, while there was a bigger class of quarterbacks that year, it hasn't turned out to be the best year of quarterbacks in 2021.
Well, by the way, can I tell you, that's my big concern. The reason that I say you got to take a swing, and Will Howard doesn't count as taking a swing in the 6th round. No offense to him. That's not trying. That's playing the lottery and hoping it works. If you're taking a guy in the 6th round, Tom Brady only happens once every spin of the year. I guess only once in the history of the earth, come to think of it. Bart Starr was a 15th round draft pick, Russell Wilson late pick, and so on. But anyway, Dak Prescott. It's a crapshoot at that point. It is interesting to look at 2021. That is always the one I point to, because in spring of 2020, the counsel was, don't go for one of these guys this year because the 21 class is better. So you're better off to not reach on a quarterback in 20. And instead, because Tua, you'll remember before the hip injury at Bama he was going to be a stud. He was going to change football and all the rest of it. Justin Herbert, there was a lot of skepticism around him, obviously around Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow. There was some arm strength stuff, but by the end of his Heisman year, people felt pretty good about him too. But still, the counsel was, wait for the 21 class. Do you know who the guys that were most touted as like, these are the guys that are the guys you want to wait for? They were, go ahead.
Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones.
I mean, this is the concern. And by the way, if I were TJ Watt, I would be nervous too. That if your goal is, if you're TJ Watt is, I want to play in the Super Bowl and I want to win a Lombardi trophy, that's not happening this year. There's very little evidence in human history that a guy Aaron Rodgers' age is going to walk in the door and take him to the Super Bowl.
Right.
And that's before you even look at what else is in the conference. So if we assume that whatever happens this year, and by the way, I should put it on the record, you and I have both been involved in tweet chains and otherwise of people expressing some optimism. There's no way the Steelers don't get the double digits. There's no way. I sincerely believe that they are a double-digit win team if Broderick Jones is anywhere close to, like I say, where he was drafted. If we assume that a Super Bowl run isn't the result, though, there's never been a rookie quarterback who takes his team to the Super Bowl. So that means 2026 is out too for the Steelers. So then the earliest TJ Watt is available for a Super Bowl run realistically on the Steelers is 2027. He's 33 at that point. That's the concern. And it all assumes, even 2027 assumes that they get it right at quarterback in what is a 50-50, 60-40 kind of proposition. No matter how good your personnel team is, it's easy to miss on quarterbacks, clearly, given what's happened even in the 21st century with the swings and misses at quarterback. There's no guarantee that because the Steelers have created this scenario where they're now all set to get way up there, no matter, even if they win 11 games this year, that they have the assets to trade up and probably get into the top 10 or have a shot at doing that. It doesn't ensure that they're going to get the right guy when they make the draft pick. The Steelers have been very fortunate. They missed on Kenny Pickett, but they got it right with Roethlisberger and they got it right with Bradshaw. And then everybody is aware of all the years, all the decades when they didn't have it right. It is more important than it's ever been is the difference now. And so now that they've loaded up, to me, the formula is you got to take swings just about every year at the most important position. It is the import of QB in the NFL, it goes without saying, is so outsized, way more than goalie or whatever other position you want to float out there, or starting pitcher or whatever else. It's so much more important than the second most important position in football. The Steelers have failed in not addressing it, maybe even in the way that the Cleveland Browns did this year, which is to just throw the kitchen sink at it. They don't have the answer. And until you get the answer, then you ain't in contention for the whole point of the season. And so that's my concern going forward here for TJ Watt. I don't even remember where we started on this one. Oh yeah, we were what-ifing about 20 if Jalen Hurts on the Steelers. Yeah, that would have been good.
Yeah, it would have fine. I was gonna bring up to your point about the Steelers. Before Roethlisberger, who was the most recent first-round pick quarterback the Steelers had made before him?
It was our guy who caught the 90-yard touchdown pass in Seattle in his rookie season, Mark Malone, number 16.
Mark Malone. Look at you. This you can't get nothing by Dave Dameshek. That's why we love having him here on this show, because Mark Malone did it in 1980 with the 28th overall pick of the 1980 draft, and it wasn't until 2004 the Steelers took another swing at picking a first-round quarterback. I can't imagine that wait is going to be much longer.
Oh, go do it. Go watch. You can find it on YouTube. That's one of the more enjoyable regular season games you'll ever see the Steelers lose. That's spoiler alert. It's a crazy game up there in the Kingdom. Before we go, I have to say one thing that you and Saunders were going back and forth about. I love Minios. When I'm in Pittsburgh, I eat Minios.
Oh, we got a pizza debate.
I like a number of options. You know what my number one is? Ironborn.
What's your number one pizza?
Ironborn. Have you had Ironborn?
On
the Strip? Oh, we can't really.
Oh, wait, no. That place in the Strip. No, yeah. I just forgot that's what it was called.
Detroit style. Detroit. See, when I know it's all right. What? I didn't like the eye that you just gave me there. That was dismissive, and I won't stand for it. Listen, don't listen to Carter. He doesn't know what he's talking about here. The Ironborn on the Strip is divine, even though it's Detroit style pizza, and I'm resentful of it because Detroit style pizza is Sicilian pizza, and I'm pretty sure that Sicily existed before Detroit did. But Detroit people, that's I try to spread that to Pittsburghers because we are in potentially the deepest hole as a sports town that we've been in 50 years. Legitimately, you can make a case that right now is the worst moment in Pittsburgh sports, or a 3-6 month stretch that we've ever had to go through. But just as a reminder, it could be worse. You could be a city whose signature food stuff is stolen from Italy and you think no one's going to notice, Detroit. You could be Edmonton, who has 2 of the 5 best players in hockey right now, and they can't sniff a Stanley Cup. They can't win. That's worse than not making the playoffs at all in my book. And even closer to home, the Baltimore Ravens, who are doing exactly what I just said about the Edmonton Oilers. Lamar Jackson can win all the MVPs he wants. He's tracking to be Dan Marino, which is to say, on Marino Island for the rest of his days. He may never get a Lombardi. That would sting worse than anything that's happened with the Steelers in the last 5 years.
Absolutely. He's Dave Dameshek. Dave, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and anything else you got coming up that people need to look out for.
Oh, follow me on Dameshek or D Dameshek on Insta and the X and all the rest of the stuff out there. Most importantly, Carter, have a grand time at the wedding, man. Enjoy it. Serve Ironborn if you know what's good for you. I only have a few more days. I assume like that the Pony Express or whatever that's delivering my invitation is held up in the Rockies somewhere or something like
believe
that.
Believe it or not, the postal service has not been great to us in this invite game. That's been a whole stressing point. You're about to stress me out by making me think about it, man. But he's Dave Dameshek. I'm Chris Carter.
Thanks, Pally.
Thank you for joining us here, Dave. Thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Dave Dameshek. Remember, you can catch this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back here Monday with more from the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.